Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the She's Got Gall podcast. I am Ebony Phillips, your host, and we are in the thick of our Women Trailblazers series brought to you by the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. This Trailblazer series has been fantastic. We have had the who's who of women who are really moving the needle in Georgia to join us. And so tonight is not going to be any different. We have a fantastic guest with us tonight. And when I tell you who it is, you're going to be like, oh my God, how in the world did you get her? And I got to tell you, she's busy, but she was very agreeable, and we're very grateful. Tonight, our special guest is Justice Carla Wong McMillian. Hi, Justice McMillian.
Hi, Ebony. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited that you're here. So I'm probably going to breeze through your bio much faster than I ever should, but I want to make sure that I save time for our conversation. Justice McMillian was appointed to the Supreme Court of Georgia by Governor Brian Kemp, taking office on April 10th, 2020. Born and raised in Augusta, Georgia, she is the first Asian Pacific American to serve on a state's highest court in the southern United States. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, Justice McMillian served on the Court of Appeals, where she was appointed by Governor Nathan Deal and took office in 2013. With her election the following year to that court, Justice McMillian became the first Asian Pacific American to be elected to a statewide office in Georgia. Justice McMillian has also served as the state court judge for Fayette County, a position to which she was appointed by Governor Sonny Perdue in 2010. Before her appointment to the bench, Justice McMillian was a partner in the litigation group of Sutherland, Asbill and Brennan, LLP. Justice McMillian also had the privilege of starting her legal career as a federal law clerk for the Honorable William C. O'Kelly of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Justice McMillian attended law school as a Woodruff Scholar at the University of Georgia School of Law. She also graduated with high honors from Duke University. Justice McMillian has been married since 1997 to her husband, Lance, a professor at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. They have 2 children and live in Fayette County, where they have been longtime members of Dogwood Church. Please help me welcome Justice Carla Wong McMillian. Yay! Thank you so much for coming by. This is a great day because we are going to be talking to a trailblazer who I have to say is incredibly humble. And I like to point that out because being a justice on the Georgia Supreme Court is not small potatoes. Like, that's a huge deal. And even though that's a huge deal, she remains humble, she remains accessible. In preparing for our talk tonight, I saw that she had recently stopped by the University of West Georgia. She was in Noonan, she was in all the places making the rounds. And so I feel very humbled that you stopped by. And I want to say, with thinking about this conversation, I started thinking about the formality of the Georgia Supreme Court and really the tremendous sort of work that you all do down there. But then it also got me thinking that there's going to be a lot of our listeners, either on our podcast or via our YouTube channel watching, who may not ever get down there because that is the highest court. And so a lot of cases don't ever matriculate that far. And I'm going to use the word typical, although I hesitate to use it, but I would love for you to just share with our audience, what's a typical day? Like, we've all seen Law and Order, right? Like, is it like that? Or what's a typical day like down there at the Georgia Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, Ebony, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I've listened to a couple of the other ones, and so I'm honored to be in that group of women that you've interviewed. And as far as a typical day on the court, I think it's something like this. I'm in my chambers right now, working with my staff attorneys and my assistant. I have 3 attorneys who work for me, 2 attorneys who are permanent, and then I have a term clerk who is a newly graduated law student who works for me for a year, and that position changes year to year. And so we spend most of our time researching and writing our opinions. So when there are 9 justices on this court, and when a case comes to our court, it's assigned by the clerk's office according to, we call it a wheel. And so we just take turns getting the cases. And once we're assigned a case, it's our job to just work that case up and research it. And how a case usually starts in that process is that we'll take a look at the case. We'll write a summary of what the arguments are that in the briefs, and either that case will go to oral argument if oral argument is requested or required in the case. And so a lot of our cases don't go to oral argument. And in any event, we hear the oral argument, we look at the briefs, and then I will take the case to our bank, which is our meeting with our 9 justices, and we'll talk about it. And we'll take a tentative vote on what we think should happen in the case. And then after that, once the authoring justice gets her marching orders, we start writing the opinion. And so most of my days are spent just researching and writing. We have oral argument 1 week out of the month, and we actually have quite a bit of oral argument, but for the most part, we are just researching and writing.
So when you say oral argument, so there's not a surprise witness waiting in the galley for somebody to question, and then somebody drops the gavel and it's like, aha, that's not how it goes at all. It doesn't sound like.
No, it's nothing like what you see on Law and Order, because we don't hear witnesses. We don't take in evidence. Everything that we hear is on appeal, meaning that it's already gone through the trial court process, either in part or it's already gone to final judgment. And so what we get up here are all the pleadings, all the arguments that are transcribed and put into a transcript, and we read everything. That's why so much researching and writing, because we read the whole entire record, make sure we understand what happened in the trial court, and then research based on what kinds of errors the parties claim that the trial court made in the case below.
And so you said there's a lot of, and this kind of dovetails to what my next question was going to be, but it may be a different answer. I don't want to presume. You said a lot of your day is spent researching and writing and the like. I was going to ask, like, if an attorney has aspirations of being on a high court or an appellate court or that kind of judicial service, what do they need to be good at?
Well, I think, first of all, for people who are interested in becoming judges, the first thing I tell them to do is just be the best attorney that you can be.
Okay.
And in whatever area it is, I mean, preferably it's a litigation, so that you are in court, whether it's in criminal or civil. At least it is very helpful to have a familiarity with the court system. But just being the very best attorney in whatever area you decide to practice in. I mean, I'm a generalist. When I practice at Sutherland, the practice, a lot of the lawyers were getting more and more specialized. And I was fortunate that when I was coming up, I actually did a lot of general litigation and different kinds of cases and had a lot of opportunity. And that was really the best training for what I'm doing now, because we handle very complicated business disputes and other kinds of complicated disputes. And so those are the kinds of questions that we get here on the Supreme Court.
Okay. And so did you know, like back in Fayette, when you were sitting on that court, that this is where you ultimately wanted to end up?
Oh, absolutely not. And I actually never really aspired to be a judge at all.
Really?
I never thought I would. I never thought that I would have the opportunity. I never thought about becoming a judge, even though I worked for a judge. I worked for Judge O'Kelly in the Northern District of Georgia when I graduated from law school. But I never considered being a judge until I think it was 2010 when an opportunity arose in Fayette.
Wow. And so for someone who never even considered being a judge, it's just so amazing the path that you've laid for everybody else and becoming the first. But I would imagine there are people that you look up to, right? We look up to you, but I would imagine there's some people that you could name, maybe several. But I would ask you, like, if you could narrow it down, like, who are some women that you admire, some women trailblazers, or maybe not trailblazers, but just women in general, that you look up to, and why?
Yeah, it's hard to narrow down, and I guess I'll talk about my personal life, a woman trailblazer in my personal life, and then in my professional life.
Sure.
And for my personal life, I want to point out my Aunt Margaret. She was my father's sister, and my father's family grew up in Augusta, Georgia, which a lot of people don't know, but had a very long-standing Chinese community there, starting in the late 1800s. And my family has actually been there since the early 1900s, over 100 years.
Okay.
Well, my Aunt Margaret, she ended up going to college in the early 1940s, and then went to medical school. And with a lot of help and support from our local community, she ended up being a doctor, graduated with her MD from the Medical College of Georgia in the early 1940s, and became the first Asian American woman to get an MD from the Medical College of Georgia.
Wow.
The first one in the Southeast.
Wow.
And if you look at her graduating class, you'll see that there's only 2 women total in her whole class anyway, and she was one of them. So she was a trailblazer in her own right. And so she was very much an inspiration to me, just growing up,
right.
Knowing her. Now, as far as professional heroes, I'm just going to point to former Chief Justices Carol Hunstein and Leah Sears. I mean, they were 2 of the first women who served on the Supreme Court of Georgia, and they had similar experiences in that they started as trial court judges. They worked their way up. They had hard campaigns. They really blazed a trail for those of us who are on the court now. I mean, remarkably, there are 9 justices on the court. 4 of us are women.
Wow.
That's the highest number ever of women to serve together on our state's highest court. And we almost have a majority. And I don't think we would be here except for Justices Hunstein and Justice Sears.
That is an amazing story. 2 stories, actually. I'm just thinking back to your Aunt Margaret, like when you said that there was only 2 women in that class, and then also the justices that you mentioned. And I guess I haven't been keeping up because I didn't realize that there are right now 4 women currently on the court. That is fantastic. That is, and it's a testament to how far that women like yourself have moved the needle. But I wonder, do you think that the journey for women is different than it is for men? And if so, how so?
And I think it has been, but I think it's getting better over time. I am sure that Justice Hunstein and Justice Sears experienced much more hardship than I did because they came first. They were the very first ones. I mean, I do think it's different because people have different expectations for women in the law, especially. And if you want to talk frankly about Asian women in the law, because there's a lot of stereotypes about Asian women and maybe not being litigation material, not being outspoken, that sort of thing. And, there's some stereotypes that have to be overcome in order to become a good litigator, not to mention a judge.
Right. So when you were confronted with challenges like that, how did you meet those challenges in terms of the road being different, or maybe more difficult, or maybe more roadblocks because you're a woman?
I actually never thought about it too much or dwelled on it too much.
Okay.
Probably because I was almost always the only one in terms of being the only Asian person in school when I was growing up, certainly in law school. When I was in college, of course, there was a more diverse community because it was just a bigger community. But when I went to University of Georgia, I was the only Asian person in my class. And I think there was another Asian woman in the class ahead of me. I mean, it was just very few Asian people. And so I was always, at least, but I was always the one. And so I'm accustomed to overcoming that sense of, you go into your room and, you may not know anyone, or other people may not look like you, but you just I've had to learn how to deal with it and make friends and network and all those types of things.
Okay. And so that was kind of a lead in, I guess, a little bit, maybe not directly, to what was going to be my next question, because I was going to ask you, but it sounds like you've been the first in a number of scenarios. I was going to ask you if there's added pressure with becoming the first, like, or maybe not, maybe there's just, pressure to do your best and so on. But I wonder if you feel that maybe because you're the first to do it, that there is pressure there that you have to contend with.
In terms of my actual job, the colleagues I've had on every level of court have been so gracious, and I've never felt any pressure from them at all. In terms of just my job performance, I was just another judge, another justice. I do feel, I would call it a responsibility. I'm the first.
Responsibility.
And the responsibility I have is to go out in the community and tell my story, and also to bring up those who are coming up behind me. When I was growing up in Augusta, and very small Chinese, it was a longstanding Chinese community, but very small community. I remember my family, we used to be so excited when we see another Asian person on television. Or we really didn't know, no Asian judges or lawyers or, anyone like that. And so I can remember I actually went back to Augusta, about 5 or 6 years ago, and spoke at Fort Gordon for their Asian American Heritage Month. And I remember someone coming up to me afterwards and saying, "You're the first person I've ever met who's an Asian judge." Wow. Like, we've never, they just were just amazed that I was in that position. I was on the Court of Appeals at the time. And so I do feel a responsibility to show others who are out there that you can succeed, you can get to this point, and also to do whatever I can to mentor people and bring people along with me.
So when you encounter people that say, I've never seen another Asian judge or things like that, do you feel that maybe telling your story the way that, you've been doing, like I mentioned earlier, you were at University of West Georgia, you were in Noonan, you're all these places, is part of that sort of, or part of those types of events and visit, is that part of telling the story? Because I think we throw the word trailblazer around a lot, and it's well deserved by the people I think that we give the label to. But I think it's also incumbent upon us, to your point, to think about legacy, and to think about having a first and a second and a 100th and a 1000th and and building that up. Is that part of the reason why you go around the state the way that you do and participate in the community events and all the things, or is that for a totally different purpose?
No, it's definitely one of the reasons why I do that. And that's why I especially love going to colleges or talking to civic groups like Rotary Kiwanis, and which was the event I think that you were mentioning in Noonan, because I get to talk to regular people about what I do.
Yeah.
And kind of normalize it and take some of the mystery away from it. And I think that's important. Not just because, not that I want to just because I'm a trailblazer, but I think it's important for the justice system that people see judges out and about in our community and know who we are and what we stand for and what we do, because we're held accountable to the people as elected judges here in Georgia.
Right. It's quite a climb. I mean, it's not a small feat becoming a justice on the highest court. What do you think is the most rewarding part of that, though? Like, once you kind of ascend to that place and you can finally take a breath and look back from whence you came, what's the most rewarding part of that for you?
I think the most rewarding part is making a difference, I hope, in the law of the state, in applying the rule of law, in creating stability in the law, and something that people can rely on and can govern themselves, and just being part of that. I mean, I can remember when I first got on the Court of Appeals. This was 2013, and just driving into Atlanta and just being in awe that I was in that position to be able to do that. Just seeing the skyline of Atlanta and just being amazed that I just had that opportunity to be able to serve the state in that way. Yeah.
And so you've been at it for a good minute now. What would you tell your 25-year-old self? Like, if you could turn back time and say, this is some sage advice for you. You're going to need this for later.
Well, first of all, my 25-year-old self probably wouldn't listen to me. So I'm not sure. Like my daughter, my daughter's 15 and, I don't know very much, so whatever. But, if I were to tell my 25-year-old self anything, it would be to make sure I continue building those relationships with people, not only in my law school, but in my work at the firm, my opposing counsel, people within the community, how important that is. I mean, I can tell you, I worked really hard when I was a lawyer. And so I don't think I would have to tell myself to work any harder, because I worked plenty hard. But it's probably to the detriment of some of the time I could have spent building some of those relationships.
I'm writing that down. And what about maybe advice that you would have on any topic? We're going to wrap, because I know you have other things you have to get to, but I probably could talk to you all night if you would let me, but there are people watching and listening who don't really get to talk to or hear from a Supreme Court justice on a regular basis. They don't get to talk to or hear from an accomplished woman lawyer like yourself on a regular basis. So do you have just any general advice you want to share? Not even necessarily about the law itself, but maybe about women or about life. I'm just leaving the last question wide open for you to just drop some nuggets that we can use for later.
Yeah, I mean, I think one very good piece of advice that I got along the way is to make sure that you have your community of people who help you, give you advice, support you in your various stages of your personal life and your career. I can remember being a young mom at the firm, and there was a group of women lawyers who we were all in the same stage of life, and we would meet together for lunch and talk about how to handle our babies as well as our practice. And it was a really great group. Now, then, I outgrew that group because my kids got older and I went on to different things, but I have different people now that I rely on in different parts of my life. And that same group of women I now talk to about our, college age kids and our, our
Right.
teenage kids, but also have other people in my, professional life that I rely on. For example, when I first became a state court judge, and actually I met him when I was practicing law, but I really got to know Judge Al Wong from DeKalb State Court when I became a fellow state court judge. And he's been such a great wealth of information along the way. He was a trailblazer in his own right, first Asian American judge here in the state of Georgia. And just, I have, Judge Wong give me advice in that area. So I would encourage people to just make sure they have their groups of mentors that can support them and help them along the way.
I think that's great. And that kind of dovetails back, I think, to your earlier point about relationships. I'm seeing a theme forming here. And let me just ask you, I know I said that was going to be the last question, but one final question. If you had to just, and I'm sure the challenges were many, and you've talked about some of those, but so I want to end it on kind of like a lighter note, if you will. What is a little known fact about yourself that you care to share with our YouTube viewers or our Spotify or podcast audience? I think that'll put a nice little bow on. We've done some professional, we've done some personal, and kind of a mix. And if we end on a lighter note, I think that'll be a good way to end.
Well, I think probably a fact that people don't know about me and maybe be surprised about is in my off time, if I have nothing else to do and I just want to like veg out, I like to watch reality TV shows.
You too, Justice McMillian, me
so
too.
I watch The Amazing Race. I watch Project Runway. And it's mostly these shows where, they're like crafting something or, there's some sort of skill involved, Top Chef, even though I can't cook, I just love watching those shows, right? It's soothing in some way. Now, currently we're in the season of British Baking Challenge, and I've been watching or Bake Off, and I've been watching that show. So that's my guilty pleasure.
You're right. I never would have guessed that. My reality show fix is always something to do with buying houses or fixing houses or, fixer upper this or design that and decorate that. And I always tell myself, I'm going to try that. And of course I never do, but it's definitely fun to watch. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Justice Carla Wong McMillian. She is one of our premier justices down at the Georgia Supreme Court. She's the first Asian American to serve on a state's highest court in the Southern United States. And we were fortunate enough to catch lightning in a bottle, and the time lined up, and she was gracious enough to join us tonight on this episode of the She's Got Gall podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. We encourage you to go onto our website. We would love to have you as a member. Gall.org is where you would go. We make it super easy. There's a button right on the homepage that says join or renew, and we're spelling Gall, G-A-W-L. Or if you just want to find out more about our organization, there's a wealth of information there. Justice McMillian, thank you so very much for coming by. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I had no idea that you were into reality TV, so that's a great fun fact. Until next time, live your best life, build your relationships, have the community around you for all the stages of your life, and go forth and be bold.